Hi everybody, welcome back to Not Another Tooling podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm, on the treadmill, as always.
It's infectious. There's multiple people. Another one this week that told me they've got a treadmill. Same one.
Wonderful. I've got to say, I am tempted, but the upheaval, it's got so much going on, but that's not an excuse really, is it? But I get out running and stuff, so I make up for it.
You do.
So today we are going to talk about the wonderful subject of logging, which is not related to the wonderful Netflix documentary of cutting down very large trees and hauling them around, but all about where do we store, should we store logs, how do we analyze them, why do we need them, all that sort of good stuff. So I guess why don't we start with the challenges around logs today, because I see some really interesting stuff. And to be clear, I don't know about you, but I was planning to talk about operational stuff rather than security stuff, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, I mean,
cover a bit of
talk about security, but yeah, operational stuff. I just to be transparent, I didn't have the full history or understanding of how problematic operational logging is. I think I've been spoiled really, because most of the engagements and activities, whether I'm designing it or delivering it, have been dealing with like decently high value enterprise solutions which need less and less logging activity, less and less manual intervention. It's only more recently I'm understanding the velocity of the problem. It sits pretty much outside of operations normally, where actually if the outside operations function was leveraging the operational tools, the need or requirement for certainly the logging of the size I'm thinking about right now wouldn't be needed in the same way. So yeah, I've been a bit spoiled. My history isn't as solid in logging, but I'm very quick drinking from a fire hydrant at the moment to try and understand it.
Yeah, no, and you're right. It's interesting because you've got, primarily the main users of logging software, or the people who benefit from it most, are the applications teams, right? So I'm doing a lot of projects with clients at the moment where their applications teams are supposed to be delivering new functionality, and they are struggling to deliver projects on time, because as soon as something goes wrong with that application, they get two things. Firstly, they get that operational problem that we know so well of, okay, this service has gone down. Everybody who's an owner of a bit of that service, come into this war room and let's do something with it and work out where the issue is. And then when it turns out to be an application issue, they're then going, okay, right, I've got thousands, tens of thousands, in some cases millions of log files I now need to look through to find out where the issue is. And they're doing that so often that somewhere between 30 to 50% of the time, depending on the client, is spent just looking through log files to find the issues, versus what they should be doing, which is developing new applications, which is having a massive knock on digital transformation efforts. Really. So I'd share that little story.
Yes. No, I hear you. I think I was thinking, because we sort of talked briefly before we started recording on like what topic, and my sort of sentence, I think, if I'd associate to logging, is like a necessary evil. I think there's so much good stack in the estates, various tools, products, the requirement for logging, because ultimately the output, the thing that you're getting on the other side of logging, in theory can be achieved in a myriad of ways. It's almost like logging is a crude way to let's sift through it, and then over the generations people have gone, actually, rather than sift this out, let's put it into this presentation layer. And so see it as a necessary evil. Like what I see more actively now is, wrong terminology, but overlogging. Too much stuff, similar to our CNDB conversations. Like the velocity of information being put into this space becomes so difficult. You mentioned about the time of the developers, so difficult to sift through, almost becomes like non-valuable, like, because there's just too much stuff in the first place. That's definitely what I'm saying. And then what I didn't realize, and I 100% appreciate now, is a significant cost of logging. I was definitely ignorant to the fact of how much logging, certainly any cloud hosted environment and things, but I was ignorant to the fact of how much logging costs. Now I know that, I'm thinking, maybe I just create a logging product, man. Maybe that's the best way. But yeah, it's crazy.
You're right. And that's in two ways, right? It's one is obviously the cost of whatever software you're using to store or analyze those logs, right? Because they're typically costed by how much data you're putting in. But secondly is the amount of storage on the back end. And we've got to a stage where some organizations are just going, in the next 12 to 18 months, log storage is going to become our biggest consumer of storage.
That's a real story. I cannot believe that. Bonkers.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. And like, what, over your data you hold on your customers? Yep, absolutely. And in some places, there's a bit of a requirement to hold some of it for auditing. But majority of the time, people are holding it because they just think it's a good thing to do. If something goes wrong, I need to be able to look back through the last month's worth of logs to try and find the problem, not knowing that, of course, you've got a human or a team of humans trying to look through 1 million lines of logs over the last month to look for stuff. Guess what's going to happen? They're going to miss stuff, and it's just going to be fairly pointless. And I kind of feel like maybe 10 years ago, people started addressing this problem with tools. And I think it's time for a bit of a revolution, because it's almost like most of the products out there are like the Google of logging. Let's say you go and they've got this whole Google kind of data. I was going to say lake, but probably a data mess of logs, and then they start Googling in it to go, oh, maybe it's this. Maybe I should have a look for that. Maybe I should have a look for this. And I'm like, machine learning, AI, all this good stuff. Surely we don't have to do that stuff anymore. But people still are very, very wedded to it, because it's the way they've always done things, as we've talked about with many other tools before, right? It's just that changing the way you approach logs or monitoring or anything in your tool chain requires this cultural kind of shift into doing things a different way. But I do think that with the cost stuff that we've just talked about, that's getting so big now that I think people are just about ready to say, okay, maybe we can look at doing things a different way. Don't know, what are you seeing, Matt?
Myriad of things. Just coming back at the beginning around the logging activity in itself, I think about using what people wanting to put it in to retain it, they're not sure they might need it. I think there's a step before that even. I think people end up switching logs on and then it just gets forgotten about. Maybe it's a third-party dev team, maybe someone's no longer there, maybe someone's in it and they just don't remember. But I can imagine if there was like an audit that took place in most organizations of what are we logging right now, there'll be instant massive savings, because people realize, you know what, I don't need that info log. It's got nothing for me. I think just filtering it down on that basis, I think would be a starting position for sure. But I'm thinking like another one-liner phrase, which makes the most sense to me at the moment. Like less is more. The volume of data that can be put into logging, whatever the platform and solution is, it's so excessive that it makes it difficult to deal with. If there was a concentration on reducing and having quality over quantity, and I know that's hard to say sometimes, the overall value proposition of capturing logs in the first place would be like 10x in itself. Easier to deal with, much lower operational costs, lower running costs. And it would force people to be a bit more tactful on what they're putting in to whatever their logging solution is, versus logging, I'll have them all, thanks. I think this isn't any hating on developers, but if you had some sort of barrier call it Quality Gate or something. We said, you want to turn this log on? It's going to cost approximately £56,000 a year if you turn this log on. Are you sure? If someone just had that understanding that there's a massive cost implication for this, because finance drives a lot of things, right? Even if people wouldn't want to say it. Boom, there's the first level of filter. Oh, maybe I don't. Maybe actually I need about £10,000 worth of log because I need this information instead. Just some level of barrier to entry to get logging on board into the estate in the first place would make a massive difference.
Yeah, I like that idea, right? I've definitely seen it across, particularly in the public cloud world, that because you just used to being able to consume everything you want, you therefore turn on everything you could possibly get, and then you get these horrible bills. And
where's that come from?
Most of the stuff you're never using.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing. So it's a really, really good idea, that of looking back and going, well, what are we really going to need and you could probably do some analysis of what have we used in the past. And I guess this probably comes back to whether people are doing good problem management or not, which is a whole other thing that we can get into another time. But if you're doing good problem management, then you should be able to say, okay, right, so these 10 incidents for this application, actually 8 of them were these type of log files we needed to solve the issue. So let's turn off the rest and just focus on those, for sure.
That's a good stance. That's exactly where my headspace was. Like some sort of stage gate at the front to just throttle. However that's achieved, not a magician. I'm sure there's clever ways it can take place, but throttle at the beginning. And then for the stuff we've already got, validation of usage. Like, is it being used? What are we doing with it? However that was done. I mean, you're talking about a Nirvana state there using problem management. Depends on how mature the process is to look backwards and also to reference the logs that was used. If there was some other way that things could be seen to be used as well, but ultimately validate the usage, because then we've got the stage gate at the front to slim it down and maybe put some more emphasis on what goes into the login in the first place before we even capture it, capture what's needed, and then validate what's being used. The bit that I think also does not take place, and there is some rules and guidance around data retention, but a lot of it isn't the data that these guys are capturing in logs, is then deciding to get rid of, what are we doing to get rid of data? We're not just going to continue putting into the bucket. We need to throttle what goes in, validate what's being used, and then depreciate, diminish, just let it slip out, maybe on a 3-month, 6-month cycle or whatever it is. But rather than the continuous filling of the bucket, work out how to also empty it, at the same time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then you could do some clever stuff like putting that onto cheaper storage and all of that good stuff, or even onto a tape. Go proper old school.
Not old.
It brings back my IBM days of huge, great tape machines. The good old days. I think we're definitely at that stage where people need to take a look at it and be serious about doing something different in this space. I know it's not always easy, and I think this is another one where people need to take a fairly serious approach and get some senior buy-in to doing this, because otherwise people go, well, we've already got tools in that space. Why do we need to go out and look at the market and do things differently? And you definitely need somebody that says, okay, we're doing things differently because we've got these cost pressures, or we've got these pressures to get stuff out to market that we can't do because we're spending all our time doing log analysis. Somebody needs to get a hold of that. And I don't know about you, but occasionally I'm seeing a willingness to do that, but more from in the development teams than in the operations space, I think.
Actually, I'm going through, this is literally coincidental, I'm going for an exercise at the moment to look at multiple logging solutions and the driver wasn't necessarily pure operational. It was actually finance. That
Okay.
flagged. That's then bled into operational. What have we got? How do we do it? But then, as try and make it as a fair activity as possible, all stakeholders, whatever stage of that log, get touched. Whether it's the creation of it, the usage of it, the ingestion, the using it to resolve an incident, the incident team, the problem team. So we've covered off all of the stakeholders that would have some say in that end-to-end process to help select. So what we've ended up with is quite an eclectic set of requirements that touch every user group across that overall life cycle of the log. So what I'm kind of hoping, because we haven't finished it yet, what I'm kind of hoping the output is a very clear position on, we have these requirements, these things met, didn't met, score it, and it'd be a very numbers-based exercise to say, this is what's meeting the use case. But the point of it was it originated from a financial aspect. But I've got a question on this topic. So when you're trying to select like the right place to do my logging analysis and all my funky jazz, where am I going to do it? Should I try and do it in a purpose-built isolated system? Should I try and do it combined in an existing tool or solution that I've got? Obviously, the manual route doesn't really work out these days. Where should we be doing the logging analysis and ingestion, etc.? If someone was coming to market and says, you know what, we have got a logging problem, it's super manual, we want to speed that up, assuming they've got a process to filter it down, and now they're going, okay, where are we going to do it? How do they come to the decision on where they're going to do it? Whether it's a brand new product set, purpose built, or they're going to try and piggyback on some existing tooling requirements. How do they go about that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, because I think it's going to depend on audit requirements more than anything else, right? Because from my experience in this space, when you're doing analysis on something that's gone wrong, what are the logs I need to look at? In reality, that thing will have happened in the last 24 hours, right? You don't need logs from before that piece to look at. So therefore you could stream logs straight into something over the last 24 hours and just have that, continuous rolling 24 hours piece into an analytics tool. However, I know there are some people that have audit requirements, and therefore they have to store these logs for time, and therefore you could use we don't normally talk about names of stuff, but the most popular one, right, being the elk stack, right? Elastic.
Is it the most popular?
Well, if you're talking about operational logging, right? If you were just going to say a logging tool, then the S word is going to be the most popular one, or the most prominent one, I would suggest. But it's more, I'm seeing it more as a security and a seed tool than an operational tool. And there's swings and roundabouts to both approaches, right? Because in the S word, and there are plenty of other vendors in the same space, they transform those logs into their own kind of format for people to be able to search and look through, whereas in Elastic they're kept in their original format. So if you need to do some analysis, then if you need to do some auditing, then you probably need to put in something like one of those tools. And I don't know, I'm not going to talk about my preference. Go with the one that's a bit more open and allows you to plug stuff in to do analytics on the top, so that you don't have to search, because both of those options are Google, Google for logs essentially. Yep. I would suggest, but if you can get away with it, then hopefully you don't need to store stuff, and you can just literally stream stuff into an analytics engine, and that will massively reduce your storage costs ridiculously. It's just my view.
No, I've seen it. This is quite a long time ago now. So the client I was working with, I wasn't actively involved in this. It's just me observing it. They had the S solution up front, taking the pipeline from a more prominent APM solution on the market. that would be in there for a period. I don't know if it was days, but it was a shorter period. Then it would shift across to the AUX stack for call it warm storage or whatever you want to call it. And at the point where they deemed it wasn't necessary, they moved it into essentially offline static stack, which could be queried, but it wasn't really an active. A bit convoluted, but ultimately I think the overall running cost of that would be a lot cheaper than it would be for all in a single system. But then single systems are getting more clever as well with the data retention and activity of use as well. I've seen some cost models more recently where maybe there's a degraded time stage activity with it. So it costs this much in this state, move it over here in this state, move it over here in this state, same product. And then more recently, I've seen a solution which is essentially mimicking part of that, but also then has a sort of inbuilt cost model, which is based upon the level of querying that takes place, the level of asking questions, which I think is also quite a smart move. You know, that's all within a single stack, and they're not having to move it over here and do all the fancy dance stuff. They can just go, it's here. Over a period of time, it will degrade itself and it'll be cheaper to store. And actually, if we're using it and talking to it more often, it will cost more. So I like those. I appreciate those. And those for me would be a comfortable stance to go with a single stack kind of area on the basis it removes, complexity. But obviously, we talk about all the numbers got to add up and all the rest of that jazz.
They do. Right, we've talked about a fair amount in the logging world today. So we talked a bit about some of the challenges, the old versus new approaches. We talked about really that there's a couple of drivers right now for change in the logging space. One of those is clearly cost, because the amount it's costing to store logs and for the software to read those logs is huge at the moment. And the other one is just digital transformation projects getting stalled because developers are spending so much time looking through logs. So this is a good thing. Good time to go look at your logging strategy, and then start with a less is more approach. Quality over quantity. Do your developers really need all of these logs? If you could put a cost on them, suddenly they might need a fair amount less logs. But you want to also do some analysis, and if you can, do some good problem management as to what logs are essential. And then you need some good buy-in from people to change the way you're doing stuff from the old way to a new and better way. And those couple of approaches that are out there is either using a Google for logs, or using something that's where you don't need to store stuff and you can just stream logs in, which is a lot cheaper to run for sure. But if you've got an audit requirement, then you probably got to do one of the others anyway. What have I missed?
I think that covers it.
Wonderful. Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Matt. That was insightful as always, and I look forward to talking to you on the next episode. Take care.
See you later.